Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, the only podcast hosted by two of the NRF's top retail voices. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
Our guest on this episode, live from the Narvar Podcasting Studio at the NRF Big Show, is Dan Frommer, creator and author of The New Consumer, a publication covering the intersection of technology and consumer brands. Before starting The New Consumer, Dan was editor-in-chief at Recode, Vox Media's tech and business news publication. And before that, he helped create Business Insider, number 2 employee. He's a veteran business journalist, a fantastic conversation. He's been covering the space for a while with eloquence and insight. And I have to say, he's one of the sharpest knives in the drawer that we've talked to on this show. So stay tuned for that. After the interview with Dan, we'll be back with the remarkable story of the week and what's on our radar screen. Now, Steve, you look like you got a bit of a tan. You look like you came back from warmer climes. I'm not talking Houston here either. What's been going on? Where you been?
Oh, I just took a little break down to Costa Rica,
nice.
Which was my first time down there, and it was
nice.
It was a lot of fun. I actually mostly managed not to do any work, but sometimes that damn computer is just staring at me saying, "Check your emails." But
all right, Lau. In other news, speaking of warmer climes, at least warmer here, get ready for Shop Talk Las Vegas in March, the 10th anniversary show. Super fun opportunity for both of us. We're on the stage doing something called the Retail Rumble, which we'll unpack a little later. That's on the Tuesday, and we're looking forward to seeing on our friends and colleagues. Lots of stuff planned for this 10th anniversary of Shop Talk.
Yeah, I've been at Shop Talk every year of those 10 years, so that's pretty fun. It's been a very interesting journey. So yeah, if folks are going to be there, let's make sure we catch up.
All right, let's turn our mind to the news of the week. Not too much of a struggle to come up with what the number one topic is. On Friday, SCOTUS came back. Supreme Court, the United States, came back with a long-awaited ruling on the IEEPA tariffs from the Trump government and said, you cannot, those are illegal. Now, my question to you is, because I'm sure everyone listening has kind of caught up to the day's news and the back and forth, and 10 became 15. Are retailers better off today because it feels like there's more uncertainty than the uncertainty we had Thursday last week? At least they knew kind of what was happening. So take us through it. What's your perception of all this? And I guess for the folks who haven't been keeping track of the details, particularly pertaining to retail, take us through the whole thing and give us your assessment of where we're at.
Well, I'll get to your question in a second, but maybe just kind of review. And we've somehow managed to avoid talking in a lot of detail about tariffs for a little while when we were kind of talking about it every week, which I think gets a little bit to your question, which is we were in a period of still a decent amount of volatility, but it seemed like things were getting a little bit more certain, and more or less consumers and retailers seem to be getting kind of used to the state of things. A couple of things I just want to mention before I get to the Supreme Court decision. One was last week, there were actually quite a lot of news pre-Supreme Court ruling about tariffs, and they related to some studies that were released that demonstrated or indicated that, in fact, it has been consumers and companies that are paying nearly all the tariffs. Now, anybody who knows anything about economics would probably read those reports and go, "Duh, obviously," but that has obviously not been the position of the administration. But there's also been some details about how much tariffs have gone up. The average company has seen tariffs go up about 3x. And as far as whether or not this tariff policy actually seems to be accomplishing its objectives, that looks highly questionable as well. The U.S. trade deficit widened in December to one of the largest trade deficits in decades. Manufacturing jobs continue to be lost. And the Wall Street Journal had an article that said that even though many companies, certainly not all, we've talked about a bunch of situations where we've seen everything from like Ralph Lauren apparently being able to pass on most of the tariffs to companies like Walmart, who we'll talk about in a few minutes, trying to really not pass on as much to maintain market share. Anyway, the Wall Street Journal article indicated that from their conversations that more companies, not just retailers, are starting to say, look, we can't continue to have our profits take a hit. We're going to have to pass on more. So anyway, that was a kind of a whole backdrop, which was basically tariff policy really not having the results that the administration wanted, consumers paying the tariffs, contributing to inflation, but maybe we're going to see a little bit more of that going forward. And then boom, on Friday, as you mentioned, Supreme Court decision found that the IEEPA tariffs were unconstitutional. Now, it's important to mention that these tariffs, the IEEPA tariffs, so-called IEEPA tariffs, are not all the tariffs that are imposed. There are particular ones that have to do with a national emergency, at least the Trump administration determined it. So I think it's roughly I've seen some different numbers, but 60 to 70% of the tariffs that are paid have been paid under this provision. That's something like $135 billion. So those are no longer legal. Now the question is, are companies going to get refunds? Are consumers going to get refunds? The court did not speak to that. So that is a big question mark. So to get to your question, and then I'll maybe make a couple comments about the politics of this and how that affects retail. It seems like there's a lot more uncertainty because we don't know what is going to happen with those refunds, whether there'll be any at all. We don't know whether that will happen in a month, in a year, in 5 years. There definitely seems to be a lot of companies lining up for these refunds. We mentioned previously that Costco and others have already filed lawsuits, but it appears that the administration is going to fight this. So, and then I guess the other part with Trump very quickly after the ruling saying that he was going to impose using a different section, I think it's section 122, for those of you keeping score at home, 10% blanket tariffs with some exemptions. Then it went to 15% the next day. It's just chaos, really.
And those are time limited, right?
They're time limited.
I think
under that provision,
150 days.
150 days. Then they have to, Andrew has to go to Congress to get approval. But anyway, there's a few things seem pretty clear. One is politically, the Democrats are taking advantage of this. They're basically pointing out that they thought the tariffs were stupid all along, that consumers have gotten overcharged to the tune of like $1,700 per person, and that perhaps the administration should just cut a check for every American, what their share of this $135 billion would be. Companies very clearly want to get their money back. So people are using this to make their own selfish points. We can argue the merits of that, but that appears to be what's going on. We're coming up on a mid-year or midterm elections here. It's clear that the politics of this are going to be quite noisy. The evening that this comes out, the president's making his State of the Union address. So I think there's just going to be this frenzy of news, frenzy of litigation, and it seems pretty unclear when this is all going to settle. So anyway, that's a long way of saying I think we are in a worse position than we were prior to the Friday ruling. How it will get resolved and how quickly it will get resolved. The only thing I think I would say is not going to get resolved very quickly. But how specifically it will get resolved, I think we're just not going to know that for a while.
Well, a couple of quick comments as we think about tariffs. I mean, when any government charges tariffs, they have a clear record of who's paid those tariffs. So reversing that math is actually not that complicated because it's all done by code. And so they actually know. Now, if retailers absorbed some, passed some along, that's a whole other level of complication. I could see, put my marketing hat on, tariff rebate offers going into the back half where, get your tariff money. Here's a gift card and come shop and drive some traffic. So I think there'll be some creativity from our retailers for sure. But
I think that's true. But I think on the other hand, or at least part of the mix is, the only thing you seem to know for sure is that Trump, in particular, is like about the only person in a position of authority who thinks that tariffs are a good idea. And he seems very committed to charging tariff, even it seems to be very much not in his political interest. So if you happen to get a refund relatively soon, yes, you could use it as a marketing tool, but are you going to substantively pass it on when you don't know what the situation might be the next day, the next week, or next month? So I think, the Trump's in office for another 3 years. So I just think as a leader, I would be hard pressed to assume any level of permanence. The other thing just to say, and just to keep in mind too, is $135 billion sounds like a lot of money, but it's a very, very small percent of the entire economy, not to mention the retail industry.
Sure.
So, this idea that even if these tariffs are, turned into rebates very quickly, this would be some sort of spending boom, I would be highly skeptical of that.
Well, I can only say watch this space because we'll be hearing more, and that could be lots of news in the short term or a long, drawn-out battle. We'll keep you up to date, and our thoughts and prayers go to the retailers who are trying to figure out all of this stuff. We just got to comment on it. Those operators. Ugh.
Yeah, they're earning their money, at least it's in the pricing world and supply chain world.
All right. Speaking of earning their money, let's turn our minds to some earnings reports from the week. Let's start with Walmart. Some big positioning news and some interesting threads of discussion around their results.
Yeah, so, we try to take a look at some of the earnings to see not only just kind of fun facts, but what can we make of these results. So one little tidbit that I'm sure many people saw was that Walmart has lost its spot as the highest grossing company in the world, I guess, but definitely in North America. They lost their top spot to Amazon. Now, it's not exactly apples to apples if you're trying to compare retailers, because, of course, Amazon has a very big business-to-business piece of that, namely Amazon Web Services. So if you were to back that out, Walmart is still significantly bigger than Amazon. But nevertheless, on the aggregate basis, they lost their top spot. But as far as their earnings, they were really pretty good by on an objective basis, but they were a little bit disappointing to investors, I would say, from two aspects. One is that their sales growth slowed a little bit. So their overall sales were just under 5%. So that's much better than the average retailer, but not quite as good as they have been, and not quite as good as some of the companies they get compared to, like Costco. Well, we haven't seen Costco's earnings yet, but we know they're going to be in the vicinity of 8.5% sales increase, something like that, and definitely less than Amazon's retail growth, which was about 9%. And they gave a bit of a tepid outlook, saying they're noticing consumers getting a little bit more conservative, continuing to trade down, be very value-oriented. So that did worry investors a little bit. But there were a number of really interesting things. There's one number, I'm going to tease this a little bit. There's one number that so far I have not seen anybody, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist somewhere, but in terms of the people we follow or the news, report. So a really interesting fact, but we're going to come back to that next week, and I'm going to feature that also in my Substack. So there were a couple of interesting tidbits I'll just mention quickly. One was that as relates to e-commerce, 50% of those orders were fulfilled from a store. So stores being very important to the whole fulfillment structure. The other thing, and we've talked about how much Amazon has been improving the so-called race to the doorstep with their ability to fulfill same day. Walmart now says that they can do 3-hour delivery from stores for 95% of U.S. households. So virtually every U.S. household can get 3-hour delivery from store stock at Walmart. So I think we're seeing more and more of this convergence of speedy delivery in this battle, in particular between Amazon and Walmart, which will probably only continue to escalate. That's one of my predictions for the year. The ad business continues to be on fire. So again, here we're seeing Amazon and Walmart as the number one and number two retail media networks continuing to grow at a very high rate. Now, the one piece that was a little bit concerning, and I suspect this had something to do with the stock going down a little bit, is Sam's Club, their warehouse club, had a solid performance, but was much weaker than their main rival, Costco. So we'll talk about Costco in a couple of weeks when we get their numbers, but we know their sales are up in the 8 to 9% range, while Sam's Club was about half that sales growth. So seems to be a little bit of relative market share loss going on between the two big warehouse club players. But again, Sam's Club also growing their e-commerce business very, very substantially. And similarly, they are fulfilling a ton of their e-commerce orders from stores, not quite 50%, but they reported 40%. So this hybridization of physical and digital from the fulfillment side, very strong at Walmart.
let's shift gears. Let's talk about, we're still in earnings, but let's talk about Wayfair. So we've talked about Wayfair several times over the years on the pod, and they've got some new numbers out. Talk about them.
I guess good news, bad news, and skeptical news here. So the good news for Wayfair is they continue to gain relative market share in the home industry. For some of our, out of the North America or UK, Wayfair is by far the number one home furnishings focused e-commerce player, though they're starting to open some physical stores. But so they're, in a very difficult home market, they have been growing the top line. They have been somewhat improving the bottom line, but they have been in business over 2 decades. We can argue a little bit what's a fair comparison. Technically, they've been around, I think, for about 24 years. But it took them a little while to kind of work out more or less their current business model. But here we are all these years later, and they still cannot make any money. Their cumulative losses are extraordinary. They did make a little bit of money in 2020 when sales moved online and they had this huge volume increase, but their sales are actually quite a bit below what they were in 2020. I've been a skeptic of this business model for many, many years. I went back and checked out 2 of the Forbes articles I wrote about their business model. As you mentioned, we've talked about them a few times on the podcast over the last 5 years or so. And, it's a business that, it's a little bit hard to understand because the home industry has been so hurt and been really struggling across the board for the last few years. So it's a little bit hard to completely see how strong the business is. But when e-commerce overall has grown enormously over the last 5, 6, 7 years, and their order volume has hardly grown at all, and they still can't make money consistently, I don't know. I'm still really questioning how strong this underlying business model is. Now, I am affected by my time in the furniture industry. I was the number 2 executive at what was at the time the biggest furniture business in the country. Spoiler alert, no longer in business. And it's just a really, really hard business, particularly on the logistics side. And some of those things aren't going to be solved by technology, AI, things like that. So some measure of progress for sure. Being able to grow relative market share in a down market is pretty impressive. But my underlying belief is they're not able to price at a level that allows them to make money. And part of the reason why they're gaining market share is because they are pricing at an unsustainable level. That is my hypothesis. And we'll have to see. But anyway, it's a business that's now over $10 billion. Certainly one of the highest profile disruptor type brands of the past couple of decades. But very mixed bag in terms of really trying to interpret how well they're doing. But I'm definitely interested to see what they're doing with their physical store strategy. But that's not really going to move the numbers for quite some time.
And picking up on something you said about headwinds, I've been talking to retailers here in Canada, and they all say the same thing, is that they expected more people to be replenishing after the big buy forward during COVID. But what they're finding is people are holding off on these bigger ticket purchases. They're like, you know what, that couch will last another year. Because it's just like, I don't know, how's my paycheck going to be? Am I going to get laid off because of AI? All these things that kind of have this, just a bit of a headwind in the furniture category in general, to your early point. Now, one thing you said as you were finishing off there, you're talking about opening. They have a store. Anyone can go to our YouTube site and see your tour of the store. Another big retailer announced a second store. Everybody loves Chicago.
Well, I love Chicago. Yeah, we talked a couple of weeks ago about Amazon opening this mega store. Turns out they're going to open a second one, or they're trying to open a second one in another suburb of Chicago. People getting really excited about this. I keep saying, let's calm down. It is 2 stores, and it's going to be a long time before, even if this ends up working, that this will be significant to Amazon and some sort of threat, if any, to Walmart. Yeah. So, but anyway, Amazon does seem to be wanting to try some other things. So anyway, in the spirit of completeness, I think I have to mention it, but I wouldn't get too worked up about it quite yet.
As I often say, Amazon lives rent-free in a lot of retailers' minds, because a couple of little announcements about 2 stores is like, oh, did you hear the news? You wouldn't know that if it was anybody else, but they just
Right.
have a special place in people's minds, I think. Anyway, that's a wrap on the news of what was a busy week and a pretty consequential week, actually. So we'll see how that all plays out going ahead. Now, let's get to our great interview with Dan Frommer. Then we'll be right back after our interview with Dan with Remarkable Story of the Week and then what's on our radar screen.
Well, Dan, welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast. We're here live on the NRF Big Show floor in the Narvar Remote Podcast Studio. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. What a treat.
Yeah, this is really fun. We have been following your work for quite some time. We have not met in person. We've also been fortunate to have your lovely wife on the podcast previously. So that would be
amazing. Lucky
that would
you.
be
Yeah.
Lauren Sherman, if in case you can't line up the last names. But anyway, enough about her. Let's talk about you. Who are you and what do you do? And then we're going to get into some of the fascinating research and findings you have.
Well, thanks again for having me. Really a pleasure to be here. My name is Dan Frommer. I am the founder and editor-in-chief of The New Consumer, newconsumer.com. I am a longtime technology and business and financial journalist. I started my career at Forbes 20 years ago and then got the entrepreneurial bug. I was very fortunate to be employee 2 of Business Insider when we were still Silicon Alley Insider. So I've been writing digital news about business and tech for the last couple of decades. In 2019, I had an epiphany, which is that technology was no longer an industry, it was a layer on life, and it was profoundly changing the consumer experience in many ways, from shopping to how brands are created and market themselves. And I thought it would be really interesting to start a publication and business focused on that kind of collision between consumer and tech. So I've been doing that since 2019 at The New Consumer. About half of it is data-driven research, kind of bottoms up how consumers are spending differently, thinking differently, and the other half is looking for really innovative and interesting entrepreneurs, companies, and telling their stories through case studies and feature journalism.
Sure. And you've got this, when did you start your mega deck of consumer trends that we love, that we're going to dig into a little bit?
That was in 2020. So back in my tech media career, there was a research report that a former stock analyst named Mary Meeker would put out every year, the Mary Meeker deck.
Right, right. I remember.
We all remember that.
And it would come out, it was a 400-page slide deck, and it would come out once a year, and you would basically have to stop what you were doing and read the 400 pages because you would have to be able to keep up with conversation for weeks and weeks about that deck. So I was very inspired by that, and in 2020, I was in touch with a venture fund here in New York called Coefficient Capital, and we both kind of thought, wow, it would be really interesting to do a Mary Meeker-style deck about consumer, more about food and beverage and CPG and retail and e-commerce and that sort of stuff. And so we launched our first one at the end of 2020. It's called Consumer Trends. Hers was called Internet Trends. It's called Consumer Trends.
A little bit on the nose, but no false advertising.
I think we've done maybe 14 of them since then.
Wow,
we did 4 last year. We'll do 4 this year. Some are more focused on a specific vertical like food and wellness or beauty, but we just launched our Consumer Trends 2026 report, which has a very big picture look at consumer and then also some deep dives into more specific topics.
Can you unpack your tradecraft behind that? So it's one thing to say, I put this large deck together. Where do you start? Is it a whiteboard? Do you have a format? Do you have a formula? I mean, you're a professional journalist, I guess, so that gives you a big leg up in research and things. But a bit of insight into how it comes together.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of it is that I'm just in this all the time, every day. So I'm thinking about kind of what, and we always take a lens toward what matters for the years ahead. This is not a look back. This is not a, here are the fads, here's what's blowing up on TikTok this week. We're looking for enduring trends on the consumer side that are investable in terms of, founders investing their lives in creating companies around these trends, investors putting capital into these companies, people investing their careers into these companies. So we're looking at a, let's say 5 to 10 year horizon for some of these things. In terms of crafting the actual report, it's very collaborative. We do kind of a kickoff meeting. We talk about the things that are on our mind. I live in LA, Coefficient's here in New York, so we're not in the office every day together, but we come together and we kind of put topics together. And then the research is kind of three main things. One is we do a proprietary consumer survey of 3,000 U.S. consumers. I write that survey. We work with a firm called Toluna, which is one of the leading market research firms, and we do what we attempt is to be a very nationally representative survey, and that's where a lot of our kind of original insights and data come from. We also work with a bunch of other data vendors who are, very pleased to be in our report because it gets in front of a lot of the right people. Right. So we have great access to spending data from Consumer Edge or other industry data. And then the last thing is kind of triangulating all these things into a narrative. So it's one thing just to put a bunch of numbers together. We really want to tell a story. It is, it is part research, part journalism, and I would say part kind of editorializing.
Prognostication.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We're not really in the predictions for prediction's sake game, but we are trying to sketch, this is the world that we see happening.
Your time horizon of 5 to 10 years, I thought you were going to say 6 to 8 weeks these days, but I'm fascinated by that. But let's take that opportunity. Let's dig in. What say you about the state of the consumer? Not that there's just one consumer, but how would you sum up for the listeners? What is the state of the American consumer today?
What I'd say is that there's been so much doom and gloom, and I think if you look at the main consumer confidence surveys, it's suggesting that people are feeling worse about life than they did after, during the great financial crisis and after 9/11 and after all these really, really profound events. And I just don't see it that way. I think that obviously some people are having a hard time. Some people are always having a hard time. But overall, the consumer is actually doing very well if you look at spending. And if you look at earnings growth, which has been tracking inflation very closely. So I think a lot of people think things are worse than they actually are. That's not to say things are great, but spending, holiday e-commerce spending, up and higher than expectations. There are a lot of things that are actually looking good. A lot of our consumers in our survey say they're actually trading up in many categories, especially younger consumers. And again, I think there's been this sense of almost trying to talk our way into a recession or something like that. Every year it's is this going to be the year where things really head south? And the truth is, so far they haven't. And that's not to say they won't. This is a very volatile world, a lot of geopolitical conflict. The tariff thing was crazy. That sent the stock volatility.
You mean this week's tariff thing?
Oh, I mean last April.
Sorry.
But this is every week, right? It is...
Every day's Taco Tuesday.
I don't think the world has ever been predictable, but certainly things are chaotic right now, and I think that overall the consumer has kind of actually weathered that chaos better than I think a lot of people are expecting.
So on that point, well, first of all, I have a very simple explanation. Well, I have a belief that I have an explanation for consumer sentiment, which is just a matter of the sample. The sample by number is everybody. 70% of the sample is struggling. 30% of the sample or so is probably doing great. So it's not surprising to me that you can have spending go up because spending is so tilted towards, top quartile or whatever. So anyway, I just think that's, to me, is part of the explanation. I do think there's a vibecession or, whatever people want to call it. But anyway, to that point a little bit, though, when you do these broad consumer trends, how do you think about taking it down to, because it's interesting, we just yesterday were looking at the NRF spending data, and overall pretty good spending data, but home improvement was down 5%. So if you're Home Depot, you're like, well, that's super interesting for everybody, but apparently there's some trends that are very averse to me. So how do you interpret, I guess, the data to drive it down to the sector level, or how do you want the consumers of the data to be able to make it more relevant for their specific part of the world? Or do you care? Maybe you don't care about that.
Yeah, of course we care. I mean, we're always looking at growth sectors too. So that's another thing is that we're very editorially minded to look for, again, my publication is called The New Consumer, not The Consumer. So I'm looking at where are things going.
Sure.
And so we look at things like health and wellness, where people are increasingly focusing their time and their effort and their spending. The pet food and pet care business has been exploding over the past 5 to 10 years because people see pets as humans now. We're having fewer kids, but we're treating our pet. Yeah, exactly. In terms of the CPG and food industry, it's $1 trillion industry just in this country, but there are pockets of extreme growth, and those are tended tend to be in categories that are either more health leaning, or right now, like protein is the story and fiber is becoming the story. So that's where we do focus a lot of our time, certain types of supplements or services that are focused on, some element of lifestyle or health or food and beverage consideration that is taking share of wallet and share of mind.
We'll be right back with our interview with Dan Fromer right after these messages. Today's episode is presented by Fine Mind. Outfits, vibe, and trends are what your consumers eat up on social media. Are you capitalizing on them? Or do your experiences feel static or take too many hours to build and maintain? Listen to this. Fine Mind delivers on-brand inspiration to over 100 million consumers every month. Lululemon and Ann Taylor use Fine Mind's content engine to turn their catalogs into complete looks, better visual similar swaps, and on-trend programmatic ads, improving LTV, CAC faster than any other activation. Now, you can get live fast in as little as 1 week without enterprise contracts or waiting on a product backlog. Check them out at finemind.com. If the world has changed so very, very much, why have so many organizations changed so little? As the pace of disruption accelerates, leaders need the courage and the insight to aim higher in the value they deliver, move faster than they ever have before, and take the bold action to leap ahead of the competition. With Leaders Leap, Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption, Steve's latest breakthrough bestseller, you'll discover why so many companies fall into the trap of the timid transformation. More than anything, you'll learn about the essential mind leaps leaders need to make to win the future. Leaders Leap is available just about everywhere books are sold, as well as on Audible and as an ebook on Kindle for just $9.99. Speaking of segments, let's get into a couple of new young segments, so to speak. Young anyway, in the context of our conversation. That's
the context of how old we are.
You see, I wasn't sure how I was going to frame that, but in terms of us, let's talk about Gen Z and millennials. So what are your key insights? I mean, I remember in the time tunnel, retailers were worried we'll never see them in a store. They'll never, they're just pure digital. We don't know how to figure these people out. But the narrative is very, very different, kind of tuning out, want experiences. How do you see it?
To me, what's fascinating, as someone who is kind of like the oldest millennials who still grew up on the internet. And I think that digital divide is a real thing. We see it in a lot of our survey data. We see it in spending data as well, where more Gen Z and millennials, when you ask them, where do you feel most like yourself, say online than offline. And that is a stark difference. Gen X and older profoundly say offline. We are offline people, whereas younger consumers really consider themselves more connected to others online than offline. And that drives a lot of the way that they do things too, the way that they spend money, the way, they were much more early adopters of things like online grocery. They are much more likely to consider themselves gamers. They have a stronger affinity to digital native entertainment platforms like YouTube.
They don't think of it as isolating in any way. Like, if I think of, Scott Galloway talks about this often, and I have a personal experience. My kid's got a lot less friends than I did, spends a lot more screen time. Like, is there a downside to this kind of association in the world you live in?
I'm sure there is. That's not our main research focus. We're mostly trying to figure out how to produce products and brands and marketing for those people. I'm sure that, absolutely.
No, I mean, that could translate into, like, we're going to have great experiences in the store to bring people together. Like, I do connect it to a retail experience. You got Netflix opening stores, right? I mean, I do think these worlds do collide, yeah?
Yeah, and that's showing up in an interesting way in our research about AI, too, where millennials seem to be the most trusting of AI and the most likely to believe it's going to improve things on a net basis, whereas Gen Z is far less certain.
Gen Z is thinking of Cyberdyne systems and the future in that context.
Yeah, I think I think millennials kind of came of age in this age where the internet was a net creator. It created great jobs that our parents would never even have dreamed of. Made a lot of people money in the tech industry, and Gen Z is coming at this from a position now where it's actually kind of more challenging to get a job. Sure. And these 5 years ago, learn to code was kind of the pejorative at anyone in a creative craft, and now kind of we're laughing at those people going, yeah, okay, cool. Yeah. Learn to prompt. So
build authority.
Right, yes. No, exactly. So of course, not everything aligns across age group lines, but
sure.
Those are, it's 40% of the U.S. population. They're entering their prime spending and earning years. So for brands, yes,
Crucial,
absolutely,
important. By the way, one of the things I probably should have said at the top is there's so much great data in this particular overall report, but your other reports, we'll put links in the show notes. We are not going to be able to get into all the interesting things. I'll just say that we have maybe a couple more things we can dig into in the time we have with Dan. But one of the ones I wanted to talk about that you go into is the role of digital creators, and I guess interested in your perspective on how that affects retail. Obviously, TikTok shops is becoming increasingly important to retail, but any kind of couple of insights you might want to lift up there?
Yeah, there's a huge section on creators, and we come at it from a few different points of view, and one of them is that young people in America, a lot of them would like to become creators as a profession. But in terms of how it's shaping retail, I think a couple things. One is TikTok Shop is really fascinating because it just continues to grow. It is now larger, when you look at spending data, it is much larger than Sephora. It is much larger than Shein, which was kind of the darling of a few years ago. It's about the same size or depending on what you're looking at, larger than Ulta now. So it's just a massive, massive retailer. And what has driven the growth is creators. It's people who are making videos for free, basically, with the idea that they will be able to drive sales of products and get a affiliate commission and then earn money from that. So one of our data partners...
And build social capital, because the vast amount of people don't make any money from the content they create.
Almost nobody, yeah.
Right?
But that said, one of our data partners is Charm, and they look at this market very closely. In November, about 200,000 people in the U.S. generated affiliate revenue on TikTok Shop. So that's a lot of people who, again, for a platform that did not exist 2 years ago.
Sure.
And what's interesting about this is brands are essentially getting are getting commercials made for them for free. They don't
whether they like them or not.
Well, exactly. They don't really have a lot of control over it. And then the algorithm, if you're a brand, you can pay to boost these videos and drive sales, but you can't pick which ones you're boosting anymore. So
can you deboost? Is that going to be a thing in the future?
That might actually be a better
Can we suppress
business.
that video? That's actually a pretty good business model.
Yeah,
I'll pay you not to do more of that.
That is very funny, yeah.
Let's talk about...
Can we get a cut of that if TikTok does it?
I think the three of us right there,
we can patent that
originated.
right now.
There we go. I'm fascinated, and Steve and I are fascinated, and I'm sure you are, the GLP-1 impact on society and retail. And, we were looking at, apparel trends, and we're like, are people restocking apparel? And they're going out differently in QSR. They're looking for protein drinks instead. Anyway, it's fascinating. You found some really interesting insights. Share them with us.
Yeah, it's really cool because not only are these pharmaceuticals actually very effective at helping people lose weight or manage diabetes, but what's really interesting is that in our survey of users, almost all of them said they feel like a different person. So they are treating themselves differently. They, you're eating less, but they say they're trading up at much higher levels in every category in our survey than the general population. And if you look at actual transaction data, they are... So there was this kind of concern that they would stop buying food, basically, or stop buying anything. Sure, they're eating less, but they're eating better. They're eating food that is better for you, and they say that they're eating higher end and more expensive things too. But they're also outspending on things like handbags and clothing and jewelry and other categories where this is kind of a recreation, like a new self, and they want to feel like that. And so I think there's a huge opportunity right now. One estimate is that 25% of U.S. households have at least one person on a GLP-1. That's expected to grow to about 35%. That's from Circana.
Yeah, Circana talks about, once you get to pill form, it just is another step change.
Which is just happening right now.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's not going anywhere. It's, people see health and wellness as one of the huge drivers of culture right now. And so I think that's just, another way to look at where is growth going to come from in the next several years, and it's increasingly going to come from people who are reinventing themselves and want a new look and a new way of living.
Yeah. So one last question before we let you go on, because I find this particularly fascinating as a health and wellness thing, is the interest in longevity, which really seems to have exploded in the last. I know we've had Peter Attia and some other folks that have obviously become kind of media figures around this, but what are some of the takeaways there?
I think especially coming out of COVID, health became top of mind for everybody. It had to be. And now it's become more of this wellness thing. And people want to live longer. In our survey, about a third of people said they would like to live forever. And then in our more recent one, more than 40%.
Have they seen what's going on in the
know.
world?
Yeah. Now, does that correlate to the percentage of people who believe in UFOs? Because I've done some research in Canada.
That is a great one. But more than 40% of Gen Z and Millennials say they consider themselves in kind of health optimization mode right now. So obviously there's a huge industry of supplements and services going after those folks, from different types of longevity like NID supplements to the function healths of the world. What I think is interesting is that this is not actually, when you look at what's driving this motivation, it's not purely about living longer, but it's actually about living better while you're here.
Better,
so
right, yeah.
I think that needs to be the message, is not just like live forever, because it's kind of not going to happen. I think people obviously will continue to live longer, but I think it should be, live better in
Enjoy the years that
precisely
you have left.
Yeah.
I got one quick follow-up question. And you're in LA, your partners are in New York. You do this national research, but sometimes we've talked on the pod about this coastal phenomenon where brands kind of go off kilter because they are focused in the two major capitals, and they don't really get the center of America. They don't really get the majority of the population. How connected are you, and how do you focus and make sure you don't skip over that center? Because there's not one, Steve, we all know there's segments, there's not one consumer, and geography kind of matters in any kind of nation. And how do you think about that, and the way you think about trends that you'd want to share as we kind of, your last kind of, if I can leave you with this message for the rest of the year, write this down, think about this.
Totally. I mean, so that's why we try to build a nationally representative survey, and we do segment, and we can see, how the coastal elites think about things versus the rest of the country. And there are, I love working with Instacart, because they can tell me exactly which foods are making it from the coasts into, into the rest of America, and things like kombucha that were once kind of, again, like coastal hipster things are now, you can get great kombucha in Wisconsin now, which is pretty awesome. So it's certainly
cheese
a thing.
flavored, which may not. I don't know.
No, it's actually really great. It's cool to see that those shifts happen.
I love that migration idea. Like it doesn't always start this way, but sometimes starts at the coast and migrates in and spreads around. Right?
By the way, I think cottage cheese is the opposite. Like cottage cheese was very much kind of a humble thing in most of America, and now is a cool thing to be eating. So
poutine was one of the first food trends globally that started very humbly and then spread in a very, very similar way. And I'm always fascinated by how ideas spread.
And then you can get lobster poutine with truffle. So
right. Well, only in LA or New York, because nobody else thinks that's a thing. This has just been such a fantastic conversation. I've been a fan of yours for a long time. So
thank you so much for having me. Really
thrilled.
Yeah, really nice to hear that.
Now, if people want to get a hold, subscribe to your research. What's the 411? How do they get in touch?
Research, analysis, advisory work. I'm at Dan@newconsumer.com, and this report is free at newconsumer.com/trends. All of our reports are available to the public for free, so check them out.
Well, thanks for joining us in the Narvar Podcasting Studio here, live on the show floor of the Big Show. I hope you have a great rest of your show, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, Steve, you've had a week to think about this, lying on a beach and contemplating life. What was your remarkable story of the week?
Well, I feel like at this rate, we might have an Aritzia story every week because they've been in the news a little bit. But Aritzia, the Canada-based specialty retailer, apparel retailer that is growing quite quickly, out of left field, as far as I was concerned, they are buying the intellectual property of Fred Segal. Now, folks don't know about Fred Segal. Fred Segal is this iconic fashion brand. They're 30 years old or something, very big with the Hollywood crowd, real trend-setting retailer. They actually got, I think, to 17 or 18 stores, which included some overseas. So for a while, they weren't quite Barney's, but they were kind of like Barney's light. Then they retrenched quite a bit, ultimately closing their doors. This story, when it got announced, people got a little bit confused because it was reported as they were buying the store, they bought the real estate. Well, actually turns out that Brian Hill, the founder of Aritzia, bought the real estate 10, 12 years ago. This was just Aritzia buying the intellectual property. So I don't know whether there was some crazy long game going on here, but the net of this is, as I understand it so far, Aritzia will in fact reopen Fred Siegel because they now own the intellectual property. They will be leasing the space that Brian Hill's company, or this investor group that Brian Hill's associated with it, owns. And so they will be doing some form of resurrection of this iconic brand on Melrose Ave. And it remains to be seen exactly what that will look like. Whether Aritzia is really trying to kind of resurrect Fred Siegel as another brand, specialty brand they could develop, whether it'll be some sort of interesting experiential Aritzia concept, remains to be seen. But it's nice to see this iconic brand come back from the dead, certainly well regarded by people in the fashion industry and in the West Coast in particular. And it's just interesting to see what Aritzia is going to experiment with. It's, we've talked about them a lot. They're an interesting company to watch. And this was kind of out of left field. So I'm curious to see what that will look like. And presumably we'll know, I don't know if they can get it open by the end of the year, but fairly soon.
On my side, I want to talk about the power of old-fashioned product placement. Adidas Bad Bunny Resilience shoes pops off the shelf after such a fun performance at the Super Bowl. And they're now only available on the resale sites. They're up 260% from the original price. So talk about, my first example of, old-fashioned product placement has a lot going for it. My second, and for those of you who are watching Canada's heated rivalry, spicy hockey romance show, we may, as Canadians, not be able to get the puck in the net for the Olympics under pressure, but at the same can certainly not be said about the characters on the show. My favorite bagel store in all of North America, Montreal Saint-Devidieu, was featured briefly, and their T-shirt sales and bagel sales exploded. So for those of you who love a good bagel, go to Montreal. All you New Yorkers, they're better in Montreal. So that's what I have. That's my controversial statement of the episode. Well, what do you think?
Just a quick comment on there. I have had the bagels during my last trip to Montreal, so I can speak to their excellent quality. However, shockingly to a lot of people, in a recent global bagel competition, the world's best bagel, is it in Montreal? No. Is it in New York? No. It is in Dallas, Texas, where I live, Starship Bagel. So a lot of, and being a New Yorker of New York origin, that was quite shocking. But I have had their bagels as well, and they're quite excellent. So anyway, fun bagel facts. That's what we're all about here.
That's what we're all about here. Next time I'm in Dallas, you know where we're going, because I got to put that to the test. All right, let's talk about what's on your radar screen for the weeks ahead.
Well, I guess this ties back a little bit to Adidas, or however we want to say it, Sneaker Wars. So this was prompted by actually an earnings report from the folks at New Balance. And I don't think I had appreciated how big and successful the New Balance brand has been. They are starting to knock on the door of achieving $10 billion in sales. Wow. They had a tremendous quarter. I think their sales were up about 19%. So that's not too shabby. And, we've talked recently, or I don't know, for probably a year plus, about the success of Hoka, the success of On Running, the need for Nike to execute a turnaround. The same week, I also saw a story about how bad the Converse division is at Nike. Their sales are down like 20% or something like that. So anyway, it just seems like there's this moment. And probably trying to offload it. So it just seems like we're in this moment of some of these brands that have been around for a while, as well as some of the newer emerging brands. It's this big fight for supremacy. So we'll be hearing whether Nike's made any real progress. I mean, obviously they're more than just shoes, but just a lot of interesting things going on. And some old-time brands, I mean, to me, old-time brands like Brooks and Asics apparently doing very well. So all of a sudden there's all these footwear brands that are really duking it out and not only trying to grow their direct-to-consumer business, but fighting for shelf space in some of the big wholesale retailers like JD Sports and Dick's Sporting Goods, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, on my radar screen, and talk about a business that's been around for many, many decades, QVC. So the rumors are rife that QVC is going to go Chapter 11 or go into protection sometime this week. It may have already happened by the time you're listening to this. They've already sold off some of their catalog businesses. They've consolidated the HSN studios back into the QVC studios. But you know what? They still have to pay the networks like a fee. And it's kind of like the networks are like their landlords. They have really struggled to try to find the right channel, so to speak, and the right merchandise mix for the modern consumer. And, you know, it's one of those you'd think, man, if anybody's going to win with online presentation and video presentation, you'd think in some ways that a QVC of the world, you know, that's their genesis, that's their DNA. But they've really struggled to do that. And, you know, I spent 7 years in the TV sales business. It's a wonderful, fun business, but it is not for the faint of heart. So we're going to see what happens with QVC and HSN. I don't think they'll go away, but it might be a way, kind of like traditional retailers or store-based retailers renegotiate and get out of their leases in shopping malls. This may be a way for QVC to renegotiate some of their leasing or fee arrangements with the television networks that are still quite important. All right, that's a wrap on this episode.
Thanks for tuning in. To help more retail leaders discover the industry's leading podcast, please drop us that 5-star rating and review on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you enjoy your pods. And for more on my strategic advisory services, keynote speaking, best-selling books, and even more retail industry insights, go to StephenPDennis.com.
If you are a brand or service provider looking to take your influence to the next level, reach out to us for sponsorship, advertising, or event partnerships. And if you want to learn more about my own keynote speaking and advisory practice, reach out to me via LinkedIn.